Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third keynote address by Professor Nagesh Kumar. The session will be chaired by Professor Ashima Goyal, and I feel very honored to be introducing Professor Nagesh Kumar as well as Professor Ashima Goyal, even though the both of them need no introduction, but it's my duty to do so. Dr. Nagesh Kumar is Director and Chief Executive of the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, a public-funded think tank based in New Delhi. Earlier, he also served as director at United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Director Journal of Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Dr. Kumar has served as consultant to the World Bank and many other multilateral organizations. And he's also served on the board of directors of the Export-Import Bank of India and on the governing boards of the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development, Geneva, the South Asia Center for Policy Studies in Kathmandu, and the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development in New Delhi, besides a number of committees, task forces, and expert groups set up by the Government of India. He's also chaired the regional study group established by the SAARC Secretariat that prepared a blueprint for liberalization of trade and services in South Asia that led to signing off the South Asian Agreement on Trade and Services in 2010. He's also the co-founder of the South Asia Economic Journal and its co-editor during the 2000 to 2009 period. So welcome, Professor Nagesh Kumar. I now introduce Professor Ashima Goyal. So Dr. Goyal is currently Emeritus Professor of Economics at IGIDR and a member of RBI's Monetary Policy Committee. Professor Goyal research is widely published in institutional and open economy macroeconomics, international finance and governance, with more than 100 articles in national and international journals of repute. She's also authored and edited a number of books, including Macroeconomics and Markets in Developing and Emerging Economics, and a concise handbook of the Indian economy in the 21st century. She edits the Routledge journal Macroeconomics and Finance in Emerging Market Economies, has provided consultancy to Asian Development Bank and many other multilateral organizations. She's active in the Indian public policy debate and has served on several government committees, including the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and the RBI Technical Advisory Committee for Monetary Policy and the Board of Education and Financial Institutes. She's contributed popular articles to numerous magazines and newspaper articles, including a monthly column to the Hindu Business Line. She was a visiting fellow at the Economic Growth Center, Yale University, USA, and a Fulbright Senior Research Fellow at the Claremont Graduate University. Her research has received national and international awards. She's won 2 Best Research Awards at GDN meetings at Tokyo and was selected as one of the 4 most powerful women in economics, a thought leader by Business Today in 2008. She was the first Professor PR Brahmandra Memorial Research Grant awardee for a study on history of monetary policy in India since independence, which was published by Springer in 2014. She also received the Scotch Challenger Award for Economic Policy, Hindu College, OSA Distinguished Alumni Award, and 20th FLO FICCI GR8 Beti Award for Excellence in Economics. Welcome, Professor Goyal. You can now start the session, yeah.
So welcome, Nagesh. We're looking forward to hearing you. And I must say a little less formal introduction. I've known Nagesh since Delhi school. We were together there. So it's many, many years. Along with Mahendra. He and Mahendra were batchmates. And Professor Basu was there also. So it's very nice to have us all here together now. And he is now director at ISID, and I have the pleasure of being on the board, and I'm seeing that it's doing remarkable things. So I tell him that he's the right man in the right place at the right time. Because India, we've missed the manufacturing bus, as we hear so often. Import substitution didn't work, nor did liberalization. So now I think there's a new And worldwide, we are seeing a revival of industrial policy. So I like to call this the export competition regime. And they're doing a lot of, ISID specializes in this. I think India has industrial policy and industrial research. So there's a lot that can be done. And really to evaluate the various measures, this PLI scheme, how is it working? Tell us about it. But today I think you're going to talk about SDGs and employment and industrial transformation. So please. Yeah?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ashima, for your kind words and also the introduction given in the beginning. I'm very delighted and privileged to be part of this conference, and it's what a interesting moment to be here with some of my sort of colleagues from Delhi School of Economics and our teacher, very celebrated teacher, Kaushik, in the audience. So this is a wonderful occasion. For me personally, I'm very delighted to be here. Now, as Ashima said, I'm going to talk about a little bit on SDGs, which is a theme I was working on in my time at UN SCAP, and industrial transformation, on which I am currently very deeply engaged into. So trying to bring together two strands and see how they can reinforce each other. So I have this, yes. So basically, India is celebrating 75th anniversary of its independence from the British colonial rule. All of us know that we sort of inherited an economy which was one of the poorest in the world in 1947. And today, we can proudly claim that we have become one of the lower middle income country, but because of the size of our population, we command a fifth largest economy in the world, on the way to become the third largest. And it is just a matter of time that we will become. We have also managed to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty and improved indicators of human development, all different indicators of human development, whether it's the life expectancy, the literacy rates, the school enrollment rates, and all that. We have also occupied or come to occupy a leading position in a number of sectors, and most prominent and visible is our leadership in the ICT outsourcing industry. This morning, Kaushik referred to that. But there are many remaining challenges, daunting if you like: persisting poverty and hunger, jobless growth, pervasive informality, rising inequalities of income, which are becoming very stark over time, and the inequalities of opportunities, which is a much bigger concern. I mean, the access to basic amenities of life in rural areas is far below what is in the urban areas. So citizens do not have equal access to basic amenities of life. I was reading this latest multi-dimensional poverty index report issued by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. This is very latest, 2022, and it devotes a considerable amount of attention to India. Actually, a very special chapter is devoted to India, where it shows how India, over the past 15 years, has lifted 400 million people out of poverty, which is not a very, less significant. It's a very impressive feat for us. And incidence of poverty has fallen from 55% in 2005 2006. Mind you, this is not income poverty, this is multidimensional poverty. So 10 areas of deprivation are captured. So from 55% in 2005 and 6 to just 16.4% in 2015-16. No, sorry, 2021. Yeah, there is a typo here. But still, India is home to 229 million people in poverty, which represents the biggest concentration of poverty on the earth. But what is very worrisome is that there is a very wide rural-urban gap. So percentage of people who are poor is 21% in rural areas compared to 5.5% in urban areas. So bulk of these 229 million people living in multidimensional poverty are living in rural areas. So this, divergence between rural and urban is not very healthy. There is also wide gap or variation in the poverty numbers across states. So the range is between Bihar at 55% to Pondicherry, virtually none. So, so there are variations across states, across rural, urban, across gender lines, and across deprivations. So some aspects of deprivation are much more stark than others. So in that context, SDGs can be truly transformative for India. As you know, SDGs, which were adopted by UN General Assembly in 2015, combining 17 goals and 169 targets, they are built on a premise of leaving no one behind. Everyone should get some basic minimum level of access to basic amenities of life, whether it is education, quality education, or health, or drinking water and sanitation, or electricity, and in today's world, access to broadband internet. So all of this, this approach can help us to close the gaps that we are living with. So I think SDGs are very relevant for this time for India. And given India's weight in global population and poverty, the world cannot achieve SDGs without India. So there is a global stake that the world has in India. Now, very often a criticism of SDGs is made that these are 17 goals and 169 targets, so it's like a laundry list. And one of the very senior policymakers in Government of India, when these were adopted, and I happened to be talking to him, said that this is very typical of UN and laundry list. What do you do with this? You have put everything under the sun on. So after that, sort of knocking, I was trying to make a sense of this, and so I just briefly go over that. So basically, the first 7 goals are nothing but the unfinished agenda of the Millennium Development Goals, which was an agenda before the SDGs were adopted in 2015. So the 2000 to 2015, we have these Millennium Development Goals, which targeted reduction, 50% reduction in poverty, not elimination. So now we are talking of elimination. So this is an ending hunger, health for all, quality education for all. So this is an unfinished agenda of the MDGs. The second set is basically responding to the criticism of MDG approach, that MDGs put together on a piece of paper goals and targets that governments need to achieve, but no processes that lead to them. So what are the drivers of achieving those MDGs were not there. So for instance, economic growth, decent jobs for all, industrialization, resilient infrastructure, reduction in inequalities. So these were the processes which help you to achieve those goals. So they were brought in. And the next set of issues which were brought in were about sustainability, because in 2000, when the MDGs were drafted, the understanding of the climate change, global warming, and the deleterious effects of that for the planet, the existential threat was not so obvious. Now it is. So they were, those 6 goals addressing the sustainability issue. And then finally, there is a recognition and realization that all of these goals one cannot achieve, no country can achieve in isolation from each other. So global partnership is very critical. So finance, technology, capacity building, market access or trade, systemic issues, and data monitoring and accountability were brought in. Now, there are very strong interrelationships between these 169 targets. And there are positive spillovers of integrating economic, social, and environmental pillars. So what we found after some thinking about them is that if you focus on just 7 policy priorities for India, you could actually achieve all 169 of them. So I will just briefly summarize them, and I will then focus on industrialization part of it. So these are the 7 very briefly, and I will go one by one over them. So let me go to the first one. So the first one is fostering sustainable, broad-based, and job-creating economic growth through industry-oriented structural transformation. And basically, we know that we inherited an agricultural-dominated economy from the British rule, where agriculture accounted for around 50% of GDP. We did over 75 years, we have brought down the share of agriculture from over 50% to just 15%. However, this transformation has happened in such a manner that it has bypassed the manufacturing sector, and from agriculture-dominated economy to a services-dominated economy. Services have given to us a very rapid or robust growth rate over the years. However, they could not absorb the people coming out of or becoming underemployed in agriculture. They could not absorb them in the same proportion. So as a result, we have a very lopsided structure. Agriculture, which is only contributing 15% of GDP, absorbs or sustains nearly 46% of India's workforce. And services, about with 56% of GDP share, only 26% of workforce, and rest goes to industry and manufacturing. So this neglect of manufacturing or industry in our development, has led to this kind of lopsided structure, which means that a lot of India's workforce remains, held up in the informal sector, trapped in low productivity jobs in the informal sector, and we are not able to find decent jobs for them. So we did some simulations in my past job at UNSCAP using CG model. We showed that if we were to give greater attention to manufacturing sector over the years, so that could help in generating some 12.8 million additional jobs over the business as usual scenario, and lift 25 million additional people out of poverty. So, focusing on industry, especially manufacturing sector, can create more jobs, and I will talk about it more later. So manufacturing should drive India's, next phase of India's transformation, And in that context, this focus on Make in India is very timely, I believe. The second priority, I will come back to industry a bit later in more detail, but let me finish this one round of 1 to 7. So this harnessing demographic dividend through universal access to quality education and health. India, as we know, is in a very demographically sweet spot, so to say, where we have the dependency ratio or proportion of working age population is rising currently, and it will continue to do so for next 15, 20 years. So this is a very interesting time for India, where we have a very youthful population. And if we can harness this demographic dividend through investments in human capital and human development, we could do very well. So I think there is this figure at the bottom. I don't know how visible it is to everyone, but this is about how in Europe population has already aged very heavily. In East Asia, Japan, Korea already aged. China is aging very fast. So India comes up as a country which still has youthful population. And in the context of this Industrial Revolution 4.0 or digital revolution, which is highly dependent upon skills, we could be a country providing skills or talents sitting here, because with this digital technology, you don't have to travel to United States to work. You can do it from your homes. So we could be the talent hub of the world for Industry 4.0. I think in the morning there was a lot of discussion about IR 4.0 or digital revolution in Kaushik's lecture. But we can only do that and become a hub of this technology if we are able to overhaul our education system completely, make it fit for purpose. So design thinking, coding have to be introduced in the syllabus, and the seats in the engineering colleges have to be rebalanced in favor of coding, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all that, compared to the traditional disciplines of civil engineering and mechanical engineering. So a lot of overhauling of our education system is needed if we are to exploit that opportunity. Similarly, the Ayushman Bharat is a good step, but we need to really move towards universal health coverage, which is also one of the SDG targets. Then similarly, the gaps in the basic infrastructure, this drinking water or sanitation, access to electricity, access to broadband internet, access to financial services, these are very important amenities of life which empower people, and they need to be provided. So we need to close gaps. Fortunately, a lot of work has been done in this area. For instance, under Swachh Bharat mission, millions and millions of toilets were built, so we can now, find ourselves in a more respectable place in the global rankings in terms of open defecation. Before that, it was a shame that we would find ourselves listed at the bottom of those, rankings. So, and we all know as students of economics how infrastructure has multiplier effects on all other, indicators of development. But then resources will need to be found for closing these gaps in infrastructure. The social protection is another thing we need to do much better than we have done so far, especially because of large informal sector in India and rising inequalities also. And their financial inclusion also is an important issue. And there again, a lot of work has been done under Jan Dhan scheme, where 400 million people were brought to have access to bank accounts. Of course, not all of them may be actively using them, but at least some beginning has been made. We need to expand micro pensions and micro insurance. And this NREGA, or Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, this has been a very big success story in social protection. I think it's time that it is extended to urban areas, beyond rural areas. And then we need to begin implementing in a phased manner, in a gradual manner, the universal basic income. I think a beginning could be made with old age people all over the country, and then gradually extend the coverage, over the years. Then the fifth priority is about addressing food security, and much more than the hunger. India is a very strange country in the sense that we have, food grain stocks overflowing, but we also have one of the highest incidence of hunger and malnutrition, stunting among children. And, so there is a distribution problem, and there is also an issue of or potential of enhancing agricultural productivity through sustainable agricultural techniques. This sixth one is about gender equality, and as is very well known, India is one country where the women's labor force participation rate at 26% is not only very low, but it is declining over time. So we are not able to harness the full potential of women, and there are many estimates of what it could do if we were able to exploit this full potential. McKinsey's study comes to my mind, which says between $700 billion to $2.9 trillion of additional GDP could come out of gender equality. And so there, I think promoting women's economic empowerment through entrepreneurship, through some special schemes, and building a gender-specific ecosystem could be one way. And then finally, enhancing the environmental sustainability through low-carbon, climate-resilient pathways to development is, another thing. One could focus on clean energy transition, which we are doing in a way, in a very vigorous manner. But I think in the coming years, it will have to be speeded up more, as we have this target of net zero by 2070. Material and energy saving, and big push to recycling, this exploiting the potential of circular economy, for instance. And businesses, you need to adopt sustainability and incorporate them or mainstream it in their business strategy, not as an add-on that we are also doing this. That kind of approach doesn't work. And we have also a major urbanization process happening in the next 20 years or 30 years. A lot of people will be moving from villages to urban areas. So proportion of urban population is projected to rise from around 30% to 50%. And that means we will be building new cities in the next 20, 30 years. So we could build them in a much more sustainable manner, smart cities, or this much more ecologically sustainable cities. Now, coming to the second part of my talk, which is about focusing on this potential of industrialization. I think unleashing manufacturing's potential for India is something we need to really pay attention to, although there are dissenting voices. You heard about Professor Raghuram Rajan constantly talking about India doesn't need to become China, India doesn't need to go on manufacturing path. India should exploit services and remain focused on services. My view there is nothing wrong with services. Services, of course, we should harness. We have been harnessing. But why leave manufacturing behind? Because these unskilled people that we have in India, labor surplus economy, as Kaushik was talking about in the morning, where do we absorb them? And if we don't, it is a real problem for India. So it is critical for manufacturing jobs. And of course, one would say that manufacturing is becoming technology intensive, capital intensive, producing too few jobs. That's true. Over time, it is the trend. But what is also often overlooked is the fact that manufacturing of all productive sectors has more, vertical and forward and backward linkages. So per unit of a direct job created in manufacturing, there are more indirect jobs created in manufacturing than compared to any other sector. So altogether, it does create a lot of jobs, and not all areas or sectors of manufacturing are very highly capital intensive. There are many which are still labor intensive. Of course, they are threatened by this artificial intelligence and industry 4.0. But those applications in the industry to replace workers completely will take some time. So we have some window of opportunity to quickly, build our industrial sector and then gradually move up the value chain, as many advanced countries or newly industrialized countries have done, and China is currently doing that. So and in that context, my favorite quote is Karl Dorf's 1967, who said that few countries, if at all, achieved prosperity without industrialization. And he explained which few countries he had in mind. These were Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and probably, basically these 3-4 countries which are endowed with huge natural bounties, and all others had to industrialize before becoming prosperous nations. So when we talk of potential for industrialization, actually, if you look at the patterns of the past some years, you find that actually we have been deindustrializing prematurely rather than industrializing more. And so I was just computing import share in final consumption, which shows a steep rise, especially in select areas like electrical and electronic equipment and all that. And in many sectors, especially labor-intensive, low-technology sectors, production was actually outsourced after rupee started to appreciate in real terms after 2004 or 5. So we have witnessed what is called as premature deindustrialization. Why premature? Because Danny Roderick has written an article which shows how deindustrialization is a stylized fact after you cross the threshold of 5,500 per capita, $5,500 per capita income. India is nowhere close to that. So it happening when you are in 2,000, 2,500 or $3,000 per capita, it is premature. So in that context, Make in India is a very timely step to reverse this trend. And now I want to just focus on what are the key opportunities for India for industrialization. I have put 4 groups of these key opportunities. One is manufacturing for India, making for India. So some selective or strategic import substitution opportunities. Now, just back of the envelope kind of calculations, in 21-22, our total imports of merchandise were $610 billion. Of course, a large part of it was accounted for by hydrocarbons, the crude oil that we import. Also gold, and number of other commodities, what is called in the trade classification bulk imports. So bulk imports account for roughly half of India's merchandise trade. But the other half, $300 billion, is largely manufactured goods, many of which were actually manufactured in India but were phased out in this process of hollowing out of Indian industry. So if we were to restart manufacturing of them and we start manufacturing them in India, substituting for imports, even 50% of them. So $300 billion of manufactured imports, 50% of them we try to make in India. That is $150 billion of new production, which compared to $450 billion of total manufacturing value added in the country at this moment, roughly, it would mean 33% jump in total manufacturing value added. So if we can achieve this in next 3, 4, 5 years, so the manufacturing value added could go up by 33% by just substituting only half of what we are importing. And domestic demand has risen to a level in most of these areas or most of these products to sustain a competitive or economies of scale kind of level of production, that we are not just making them at any price like we were in the 60s. So the earlier episode of import substitution failed because we did not bother about economies of scale, we did not bother about global competitiveness. We were focused on making them in India at any cost. And that is why when we opened up our economy, many of these industries were, sort of had to close down because they were not competitive. So this time around, we have a market size which can sustain world-class production, world-class scale or volumes for many of these products. Now, PLI, this production-linked scheme, is trying to incentivize this production, and I'll comment upon on that. So how could that be made slightly more meaningful? The second opportunity is about export-oriented industrialization. Of course, a reality check is in order today. There is, we are living through a very subdued growth of advanced economies and world trade. World trade actually never recovered from the global financial crisis. Before global financial crisis between 2003 and 2008 or 7, the average rate of annual growth of world trade was about 7, 8, or 10%. Today, it is 1 to 2%. 21 was an aberration because it was recovering from a 30% loss in the world trade in 2020. But now again back to that flat kind of rate of growth. There is also a trend of rising protectionism, US-China trade war, but also huge protectionism in advanced economies. Various forms it is taking, and I will talk about a little bit later. So, but India's share in global exports at 1.7% is very marginal, and if we begin to enhance it by consolidating our exports in some areas and build on some of the others, especially taking advantage of this China plus one strategy. China plus one strategy and friendshoring and all these are terms being used for reconfiguration of the value chains by multinational companies because they faced or they realized the follies or vulnerabilities of depending too much on one single source, that is China, after the pandemic. So some of these supplies were disrupted. So they have this policy of China plus one. So as a result, Foxconn and Apple, they are making a lot of phones in India. and not depending too much on China. So that is something which might help India in attracting this outsourced production to India, and as a part of this strategy of multinational companies in reshoring and or friendshoring, shifting to countries that are friendly with the United States or the Western world. The third opportunity for India is about this digital and electronics ecosystem. We all know that the way we are consuming the electronic gadgets and the way imports are snowballing, there are projections that India would be importing $500 billion of electronics goods per year by the middle of this decade, 2025. So we have to do something about that, and then beginning has been made, then this PLI and incentivization of mobile handsets. So in September, there was a news in the newspapers that India crossed $1 billion of exports of mobile handsets. Now, one would say that these are basically shallow assembling. There is hardly any value addition in them. But then you look around the world, this is the only way electronics anywhere has come about. So first you start assembling, then work backwards, backward integration. You start when the volume is large, so the component manufacturers also come to set up their shop to supply to the assemblers, and that is a trend which is beginning to pick up. So you see a semiconductor mission which has produced already 3 credible proposals of making chips, microchips, one by Vedanta, Foxconn, one by TSMC, this Taiwanese big company, and then Tatas are trying to enter there. So this ecosystem for making electronics components is the next step after setting up big assembly shops. So we have set up big assembly shops, and Apple, for instance, is talking of 25% of their phones made in India by 2025. And Samsung already has a big plant in India for assembling their phones. So gradually, when India becomes a good destination for these phones, computers, and all other electronic hardware, more and more will happen. So it is a cumulative process, and success breeds success. The fourth kind of avenue or opportunity for manufacturing-led growth for India is in green industrialization. This whole set of new industrial opportunities are emerging. This, because of the emphasis on clean energy transition, there is a heavy emphasis on solar photovoltaics and related equipment, the batteries, these wind turbines, green hydrogen-based economy, circular economy, recycling industry, and electric mobility, the electric cars, electric two-wheelers. And India is the biggest producer of two-wheelers in the world. It can become a biggest manufacturer of electric two-wheelers, electric small cars, for instance. So this is a big opportunity for India, given India's large market on these compact cars and two-wheelers, to become new hub for these electric vehicles. And of course, they contribute to achieving the net zero target of 2070. So putting together some of these opportunities, if we are able to exploit them. Now, one can just do some rough kind of projections, and then that in government is talking of $5 trillion economy by 26, 27. So what could be the size of the manufacturing value added? And then by 2027, when we are expecting our economy to grow to $30 trillion, which is very much possible to do, to achieve, what could be the size of the manufacturing sector? And if we were to have nearly 30% of India's GDP coming from manufacturing sector, which is a lower range of the manufacturing share in East Asian countries. There it is upwards of 30%. So if we were to have that kind of range, then we could be talking of a $9 trillion of manufacturing value added in 2047. Now, how would it happen? Industry nowhere in the world has come about without major effort and strategic interventions. So they have been justified in theory over time. The infant industry protection has been justified since Frederick List. Then strategic trade policy of Brander and Spencer in 1980s. Then state intervention in technological capability building has been very well justified on the basis of market failures, because the innovator cannot recoup entire investments. And then more recently, Kaushik's predecessor in World Bank, Justin E. Fulin, has been arguing this case for new structural economics, which is about interventions for manufacturing. But in the recent times, and Ashima referred to this, that there is a revival of industrial policy globally. And if you look at the interventions adopted by Biden administration in last 6 months alone, you will find so many of the protectionist and industrial policy instruments present. CHIPS Act, Chips and Science Act they call it, where $50 billion of subsidies will be given to semiconductor manufacturers to reduce their dependence on China. It's very much like our PLI in India. They have this domestic content requirements in Buy America provisions. They have Inflation Reduction Act, which reads very much like, PLI and other industrial policy instruments that one is talking about. EU has just debated and enacted this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is kind of additional tariffs that will be imposed on imports to EU in the name of climate change or climate protection. So East Asian development experience, which has been actually recent books by Deepak Nair, one edited and one authored by him, and to which I think, Kaushik, you have a contribution to, have served very well to highlight how very extensively industrial policy or strategic interventions were used in East Asian countries, and today you see the results. So what did they do? Extensive use of trade policy to provide local manufacturers space to grow and reap economies of scale. Tariffs were only one of the mechanisms. So non-tariff barriers were used much more extensively. Japan, for instance, went to the extent of changing their electric current from 110 volts to 100 volts, so that nobody from the world can sell their electrical equipment in Japan, but they can flood the market all over the world. So there are many sort of interventions in non-tariff barriers to keep competition or imports out. They also use exchange rate, competitive exchange rate very extensively. Japan kept yen very low, so much so that US had to force Japan in 1985 at the Plaza Accord, as it is called, to negotiate and force them to float yen, and then it began to appreciate. Before that, it was kept artificially very low. China's interventions in foreign exchange markets are very well known. They even had a dual exchange rate, one rate for imports, one for exports in the past. Later on, they defined, they pegged it which was able to float only within 2.5% of the pegged rate. They have all adopted a very selective approach to FDI to get what they wanted, the technology, and so they impose extensively, performance requirements on FDI, that we will give you access to domestic market provided you produce here that much or, export that much from here. They directed credit through national development banks. All of them had number of development banks. Some of China's development banks which lend to the industry are biggest in the world, much bigger than the World Bank ever would be. And they subsidized and supported local technological capability building, not only through subsidies, but also through soft intellectual property laws, till very recently. So, coming to India's case, I think what are the key issues for India to foster manufacturing? One is, of course, as I said earlier, not to repeat the mistake of the 1960s, to produce at any cost, but produce competitively. So this is very much to be borne in mind. After all, in today's world, any producer is only as good as one is competitive in the international market. You should be able to face competition. And for that, management of competitive exchange rate is, in real terms, is also very important. We cannot afford to allow rupee to appreciate in real terms. And that is something which is very important. And coordinated, implementation of all different aspects of industrial policy is very critical. So we cannot have a situation that government is trying to give PLI and import protection to manufacturers and rupee is allowed to appreciate, which is nullifying the effect of, whatever incentives or protection was provided. We also need a new financial institution for term lending to the industry. We began our industrialization journey with a trinity of three, financial institutions: IDBI, IFCI, ICICI. They were created to support industry much in the same manner as East Asian countries have done. So they were lending to the industry, term loans. And they had built their own technical capacity to work with the industry. So sometimes debts were created into equity and vice versa, depending upon the requirements of the industry. Now, towards the end of the last century, the turn of the century, they were converted into universal commercial banks. So ICICI became Universal Bank. IDBI also became IDBI Bank. IFCI stayed where it was, but stopped lending because they didn't have any access to funds. They didn't go to become a commercial bank. What is the problem with this system? One would argue, what is wrong? These commercial banks could lend to the industry. There is a problem. Problem is the asset liability mismatch. Commercial banks borrow from you and me. I mean, we deposit our savings sometimes in savings bank or a fixed deposit of 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. But industry borrows long term. They need loan for 6 years, 5, 6, 7 years. So while their plant is being commissioned and becoming operational, break even, and then they begin to reap the harvest and repay the loan. So asset liability mismatch is one. The other is that the universal commercial banks do not have expertise to deal with the industry. So they outsource the project evaluation work to Deloitte and other consultancy companies. They don't have any in-house expertise for these. And so they are, cut and dry kind of. The moment you stop an interest payment, you are put under NPA and all kinds of issues begin to follow. So we need a hand-holding by a specialized institution of industry. And that, we have actually at ISID done a report which is submitted to Niti Aayog. I hope it will get some follow-up by the government. So what we have proposed is a endowed new institution. We have termed it National Industrial Development Bank of India, or NIDB, which would do this. And we have also suggested how it can be endowed with a lot of resources without encroaching upon the national exchequer or the budget so much. So that's one. Then proactive foreign direct investment policy, proactive, not just leaving it to the markets that we have liberalized, anybody who wants to comes in. We need to be proactive to enhance the quality of FDI. So we target the FDI of the type we need rather than anybody who knocks our doors. And this also, the very good time, a very good opportunity, this China +1 and friend shoring kind of approaches adopted by them. We should leverage them and get them to come to India, set up the shops, the way some of these people have been encouraged by the government in recent times. And in PLI, my view is that sales, which is the criteria at this moment, can be a problem. I think we should target value addition over the years. So one could reach higher value addition through just increasing sales or through backward integration. So I think and exports could be added to that. So exports and value addition should be the criteria for determining successful implementation of PLI rather than just increasing sales. And finally, leveraging innovation. I think everybody agrees that any country which has succeeded in manufacturing has succeeded with very heavy dose and emphasis on innovation. So for product development, for process development, for productivity enhancing improvements. And so we need to pay attention to that. We have a pathetic ratio of R&D to GDP of 0.7%. And even that, a very small proportion actually is spent by companies or firms, manufacturing enterprises. The rest is all spent in public funded institutions. So we need to change that. And for that, there are a number of steps that need to be taken, including one about the patent system, the alternate patent system for incremental innovations, which Japan, China, Korea all had. It is called utility models. So you have a softer patent for incremental innovations rather than very major innovations which are able to get a proper patent. So number of things need to be done. I won't go into the detail. And since I have taken a lot of your time, let me just sum up what I was talking about. So first of all, from being one of the poorest economies, India has emerged as the 5th largest economy in the world with substantial reduction of poverty and other deprivations in the 75 years. We can be justifiably proud of that. Yet, India represents one of the largest concentrations of poverty and hunger and inequitable access to basic amenities of life by citizens, especially between rural and urban areas. SDG approach of leaving no one behind is of special relevance for India to close the remaining development gaps and provide sustainable prosperity to its youthful population. A manufacturing-oriented transformation is imperative for India to address the challenge of decent job creation, and Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat are timely initiatives. Of course, one can refine them as one goes along, as I was talking. Revival of industrial policy for strategic import substitution, leveraging large and growing domestic market to foster competitive manufacturing and for exports, exploiting new opportunities presented by green and new digital revolutions, need for a strategic approach to harness the potential of manufacturing, leveraging domestic strengths for developing new efficient products for local and global markets. And there are useful lessons to be learned from East Asian experiences in using strategic interventions and other facilitations for promoting industrialization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagesh. That was really comprehensive. But I want to pick on one thing that really struck me. I think that as what I said, export competition, how do we avoid the mistakes of the past and find something in between that works? And I think here design features will be very, very important. So your idea about special patents to induce more R&D and innovation. And I think there are many ways in which India can draw on its strengths, the opportunities we have currently. Because when you match against SDGs, it looks like we have a long way to go and we have many problems. That is also true. But for semiconductors, for example, recently I heard a very interesting talk on this, and they were saying that NRIs, Indians, that the most important thing to build a semiconductor industry is skills. Skills that people in their 40s have after 20 years of fighting it in very competitive industries. So apparently Korea or Japan, when they built up their semiconductor, they managed to poach some of this talent, China also. And India has a lot of Indians who could be induced to come back. And apparently US firms, because of all this CHIPS Act and so on, they are losing a lot of revenue exports to China. So India is an obvious place where they could, compensate some of this revenue loss. So there are these opportunities. And so, one of the big things is that any incentives given by the government have to be timely, targeted, and temporary, not, endless crutches that stay forever. But at the same time, you have to build an ecosystem of industry. So it can't be very temporary either in semiconductors. So to get this right will be really important. So questions, comments from the floor, Mahendra?
Yeah. Thank you, Nagesh, for a very good lecture. So on the manufacturing versus services, I'm not supporting Raghuram Rajan, but so basically, manufacturing now we have 12% of employment and 17% of GDP. So to reach China's kind of 30-40%, I mean, that in that context, probably he was talking that we can't go China kind of thing, but maybe you can go up to 20% GDP or the manufacturing and things. So it's an incremental rather than the export-led growth of East Asia and that kind of thing. And on, I think some of the studies by Rupa Chanda, others, they say that we can't have manufacturing versus services. It's a complementary kind of thing. So we have to walk on two legs rather than saying that manufacturing or services and move from agriculture to thing. Another thing probably you didn't touch is the MSMEs. Where almost 40% GDP or exports and other things and also from the SDG point of inequality point of view. So that is the thing. And one or two things, on some of the criticism of India is the tariff increase in recent years, including Arvind Panagaria and others are saying that India is becoming protectionist kind of thing. So that policies, what do you do? On semiconductor, lastly, some people say that India should not produce semiconductor kind of thing, but chip design is better than having manufacturing, and also giving subsidies to Vedanta is one criticism of that policy. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Nagesh will respond, but I think India is too large a country to follow one strategy. So it's manufacturing, agriculture, services, everything has to. Any? Yeah, please.
Thank you, sir, for this very insightful lecture. I am Akanksha, and my question is with respect to your point about pushing Make in India. Given that women face a lot of mobility restrictions with respect to, because of multiple reasons like childcare or gender norms, and also given that these manufacturing jobs are in specific locations, what could be like policy suggestions to make sure that these manufacturing jobs are made more accessible to women?
Yeah, thank you, Nagesh. Again, just to add to the questions already put, my question, relates to the kind of incentives you talked. How much of it actually, as a percentage of GDP, how much of it government has to bear? And a related question is, will that be compatible with international agreements, WTO compatibility? Do we have to bother about it, or we also, we have opportunities to ignore that also? Maybe some comment on that.
Thank you, sir. So I am Dhananjoy. My question is, in terms of whatever you talking about the sustainable agriculture and the food security. So recently this year, Government of India announced that they are starting to zero budget natural farming along the Ganga River, and 5 kilometers wide they started. And as well as also they are motivating the climate smart agriculture. So considering the issues of the fragmented land day by day increasing and the marginal farmers in India right now, again 70% people dependent on agriculture. So which one is fruitful to achieve the sustainable agriculture? It is zero budget natural farming or climate smart agriculture and precision farming? Thank you, sir.
I'll just, you can answer all those questions. My question is very simple. How long a window do you observe or do you see in your mind where India can actually harness the demographic dividend? Because we've been hearing this for the last 20 years that China is going to lose it since the 2001 census in India. And that structural break that you should have seen because of the demographic dividend in the last 20 years has not happened. And since 2017, there have been naysayers who have been saying that we have missed the boat. So my question to you is, you said there's still time to harness the demographic dividend. How much time do you foresee for us to take advantage? Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for extensive talk. And what I infer from your talk, or I was understanding, like when I see your talk, two India again come in mind, like one is high-tech industries, which you were talking most of during your talk, and another one is micro and small medium enterprises, which were first to die when lockdown was imposed, and before that due to COVID-19. And so if you can reflect on that, like what is happening to these, because in manufacturing and export sector, MSMEs are major contributors in India, and government is also focusing on vocal for local and localization of SDGs. So what is happening to that, if you can reflect? Thank you.
I answer this set of questions? Thank you very much for all these very interesting and penetrating questions. So first of all, I think there were a couple of questions about semiconductors, Ashima, yourself, and there was, I think Mahindra also referred to, that whether we should focus on design and not manufacture of semiconductors, and we have capacity in design of. Yes, we do. In fact, a lot of these big Intels of the world do semiconductor or chip design in India, in Bangalore and all. And so we have that strength in terms of, but of course, all of this is proprietary technology. I mean, they are just doing work for their employers and not available to India. But in in practice, yes, these the human resources are Indians and we can leverage them. But real value addition is in the, in the manufacture of that. And the argument which is generally made is that why manufacture something for which you may not have, adequate demand, and so import from wherever it is available cheaply. I think that is now very clear that India has adequate demand for sustaining not only 2, 3, but 5, 6 world-scale plants in in these semiconductors. And the other thing is that we have seen in the past few years in this post-pandemic kind of period that only 2 or 3 sources for these semiconductors, China, Taiwan, South Korea, and some in Japan and some in US, basically total of 5. And they command entire market, very largely, large shares of China, Korea, and Taiwan. So high dependence on these countries, and there is no reason why we should not make an entry into this. And there is a huge domestic demand to sustain this, economies of scale kind of mass production of them. And it will give us strategic autonomy. I mean, China being China. So everybody is trying to diversify for this region, that one day it could become a lever, of strategic influence. So when there are economies of scale, there are companies willing to invest in it. Why not exploit this? Of course, incentives. But, these are incentives given for pioneering industry, which have huge spillovers and paybacks in many forms. So most countries, I mean, Malaysia, which has become a quite rich country or prosperous country, still gives pioneer industry incentives. So any company which comes and knocks their door that I want to produce something which you are not making as of now, you do get a lot of huge incentives. India's biocon industry, this Kiran Majumdar, she set up a $1 billion insulin plant in Malaysia because the government was giving incentives to her. So these are given with a calculation that you reap what you give to them, you reap in many forms. So people who will be working in these plants, they will be paying income tax, You will get some the production taxes over time, and jobs, of course, is the biggest of them. So now, your point about we need both manufacturing and services, this is precisely what I would say. It's futile to get into this debate of manufacturing or services. And I think we need both, and both to the fullest possible extent. MSMEs, yes, I think it is very important, sector of manufacturing. And when I was talking about the labor-intensive goods and the component manufacturing, it's essentially, it will be in the MSME sector. But yes, you are right, I did not particularly emphasize on this MSME sector. And one thing which I forgot to mention, the fact that industrial policy can work is to be seen in last few years. I mean, 5 years ago, India imported 80% of toys, which is a very low technology, labor-intensive industry. Today, we have become net exporters of toys. So when government focused on it, gave incentives, gave them the industrial estates, and provided facilities to develop this toys industry, it has delivered. So, so at least in mobile handsets and in toys, these are two visible successes of recent industrial policy, which give confidence that it can work. It can, I mean, it is not all And these are SMEs, yes. This is why I actually, yeah, exactly. So they can work, and the jobs, manufacturing jobs, whether women can work, it doesn't have to be hardcore machine type of jobs, but today's modern manufacturing also has lot of, white collar jobs, software programming to back the manufacturing operations and all that. So there, women can work and very productively contribute to those, it doesn't have to be always a shop floor worker. And also in Bangladesh, one has seen how hundreds and thousands of, women are very gainfully, productively employed in the garment industry. And it has become a real success story. All development agencies from anywhere are coming and studying Bangladesh model. And this is all largely driven by women entrepreneurs and women workers. Yeah, Manoj's point about incentives, what percentage of GDP they could be, and whether they are WTO compatible. I think not a lot in terms of percentage of GDP. What PLI the government has promised is 2 to 4% of sales, additional sales, so which is not a big, amount it adds up to. But it gives some incentivizing effect to the manufacturers to increase sales, so target rising or raising their volumes. And in terms of WTO compatibility, the moment it is linked to exports, then it will become, it will get into a problem with WTO. But as long as it is given for any sales sold anywhere, there is no issue. And not only India, but some developed countries are also doing that. US, for instance, this CHIPS Act, $50 billion of incentives to semiconductor manufacturers. The sustainable agriculture question from behind, whether for marginal and small players, climate smart agriculture is viable. It is, it can be. In fact, it can be more viable for small players than for larger players. Larger players, mechanized farms, heavily dependent upon chemical fertilizers and all, they are for larger farms and more economical for the larger farms. But climate smart, sustainable agriculture, some of these organic farming practices are really meant for smaller players much more than for larger ones. Yeah, then the last question about how long this window of opportunity, demographic dividend will last for. India has not conducted this last census, so we really do not know about the composition of age composition or profile of India's population. But UN Statistical Division, based in New York, has come up with these projections that India will cross the 1.4 billion people in 2023. We will become the largest country in terms of population. And the projections about age profile and working age proportion, they have given these numbers, which suggests that until 2040, 45, we will still have working age population, slightly more than the dependency ratios. So we have these, safely speaking, about 20 years to harness this. But this is a big if. If we are not able to invest in them and make them really empowered with good education, quality education, then it can be a demographic burden rather than a dividend. So I think this is, and then there was a question about the high-tech versus MSMEs. I think both. We need both. We need some cutting-edge manufacturing. and also labor-intensive, small-scale industries to create jobs. So we need to exploit all opportunities available to us. Thank you.
Well, we are at 5. We are past 5, which is our stop. So if there's any very pressing question or comment, last. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. This was very informative and an intriguing session. My name is Pratna. And my question is regarding the cottage industries and the handicraft industries. So over the period, what we are seeing is that these industries are dying, and for a very simple reason that the people who have traditionally been involved in these industries, they have not been able to find appropriate market for themselves. So, I mean, your thoughts on that, and what policies the government is designing to provide them appropriate marketplace. Yeah, thank you.
Again, a very important question. I want to see if there is anyone else. Otherwise,
It's the last.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's a very important question because cottage industries need to be sustained, and because not only jobs, but they also keep our traditions and culture alive. So what is to be done, and marketing is a real issue for them. Now, looking at the current pattern of the way we buy and sell, e-commerce and these organized retail chains are becoming very important, So we need to find a way that they are forced to look at and not neglect or overlook the cottage industry producers. So some of the kind of, targeting for them, that they import a lot of stuff from outside. So some kind of performance requirement that, okay, you import this much, but the same amount or less or more, you have to also buy from our MSMEs, especially cottage industries and all that. So I think some of these kind of approaches could force these organized players, whether offline or online, to look at them and not overlook. And when they begin to work with them, they can also help in improving their quality, their quality control and all that, packaging, branding. So all of that investment needs to be made. Otherwise, our handicrafts can really compete with anywhere, any best products anywhere in the world, with some little bit of finish, at the end of branding or, packaging is needed, which is what China has done very well, and they have flooded world markets for, those small stuff. So we need to really harness and support them. So some bit of pushing the big players to come to them and help would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Nagesh. That was wonderful. And for all the students here, people who are invested in India's tomorrow, when you're in the space between the government and the free market, there is a lot that intelligent design of incentives and policy can do, and a lot of research work, a lot of thinking is required, and all of you can contribute and make it happen. Yeah? Thank you.
Really enjoyed being here and interacting with all of you. Thank you.
Let me thank both Nagesh and Ashima for this wonderful session. Thank you. Just one small housekeeping announcement. Some of you had asked for participation certificates. These are now kept at the registration desk. You may pick them. And if somebody did not ask and still needs this, you can just send an email to Saili and we will get it ready. Thank you. And one other thing, we will be sending an email link to a Google form, which is a feedback form. We request all of you to fill them up. We will be doing that probably end of the day today or maybe early in the morning tomorrow. Okay, so we request you all to fill this Google form also. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashok. Very nice to